Let's begin. Hello everyone, my name is Jorge Tigno, for those of you who don't know me yet. With me are Jean Franco, also from UP, Rod Garcia from CFO, and of course our guest speaker, Dr. Stefan Rother from Germany. This session, this conversation is actually an initiative of the Philippine Migration Research Network, and we're here now to talk with, to have this conversation with Stefan, to talk about his work, about how local governments are important in the global migration governance scheme. There's a saying in Polisan, all politics is local. So I wonder if this is also true in the case of international migration. So, Stefan?
I think in migration research we can say in the past decade or so the local level has been rediscovered. That people have realized migration, people come to a country, refugees, they come to a country, but they don't stay in the country, they stay in the city level, of course. They stay in a community. So the big debate is integration happens at the community level, work happens at the community level, social networks are based on this level. And that is all good and true, and we have model initiatives, but in a way this is also a very Western-centric perspective because it focuses on cities of destination. But I don't have to tell you in the Philippines here, but I might have to tell the other audience. Of course, cities of origin are equally important. So yesterday I had the opportunity actually to speak with the migration desk of Quezon City here, who are very involved as actors, supporting migrant families back home, giving advice to migrants leaving. So we see cities as actors in the origin and in the destination level. So that has been recognized. But the new trend is that cities also have become actors on the global governance level. And there it gets interesting, right? Because global governance has been states as actors, there's civil society, there's maybe the private sectors, but where do the cities fit in here? They're not civil society, they're not private, they are kind of state, but of course they are sub-level of the state. So are they hierarchically inclined to follow the state? So the term that has been called is para-diplomacy. That cities all of a sudden become diplomats, speaking to other cities. If you look at it strictly, it's not completely new. We have city partnerships, or in the United States we had the concept of sanctuary cities, so cities that give particularly protection to refugees. So when the first Trump administration left a lot of the international agreements, many cities said, we still give protection to migrants and refugees in a certain way. But, and that's how I came to the topic, actually I came from the top-down level, because I've been following global migration governance processes for quite some time. The Global Forum on Migration and Development, the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration and others. And about 10 years I discovered all of a sudden the mayors are here, the city representatives. And a good colleague and researcher and UN activist and a colleague to us actually invited me to say, okay, we have this new process, it's called the Mayors Forum on Migration. You should come by. And then for a few meetings in Berlin, in Quito and in Marrakesh, I was able to witness this. And their cities are actually very self-confident actors promoting their own agenda. And I have one quote here from the mayor of Kampala in Uganda saying, while national governments deal with borders and visa regimes, it is at the city level that the most important needs of migrants and refugees are met, from housing to healthcare to employment. So they are saying, we know the reality on the ground. National governments are also important, of course, but we deal directly with migrants. So in many of these processes, they want to have, what we're having here now, a seat at the table. They want to be involved and they want to be heard, so they have their own mechanisms where they report about the agency, they have their own council meetings. But it's not as easy as it sounds. For example, at the United Nations, 2 years ago, there was the International Migration Refugee Forum for the Global Compact, many long names that we're talking about here today. And then the city representatives found it very hard to be represented because the United Nations doesn't have a concept of cities being represented. There is their own, of course, agency and process for cities, but then they said, okay, you can participate, but you are part of the national delegation. And then the cities were not so happy about it, because then there's a hierarchy there, right? First, they may not be in the best relation to the national government, maybe they're very opposed to it, or maybe they have more liberal policies. So then they had to ask them to come on board.
If I may touch on that last point, because I mean clearly, when migrants leave a particular place, they don't just leave the Philippines. They leave like Ilocos. They leave from a particular city or town. And when they go to a place, they don't just go to, let's say, the UAE as a whole. They go to a particular place. So I wonder, because I mean, when local governments get involved, there's usually a tension between what the local government says and what the national government will say. In the case of Japan, for example, local governments tend to be more accommodating towards the migrants because they really need them as workers, and they're their neighbors, so they are more exposed to having relations, unlike national government officials who may have a different understanding. So there's usually tension. But at the same time, local governments rarely have a say in terms of the national policy in relation to migrants. So I wonder if this kind of an arrangement that we're seeing now unfolding, Mayor's Forum and all that, is there going to be a kind of reconciliation, a consensus between what national and what local governments are saying in relation to migration?
I mean, I share your observation. Also, I don't have really hard data or numbers to back it up, that the local level is often seen as being more pragmatic, right? Because they have to deal with the situation on the ground, right? Coming from Germany, I have to say, on the other side, we also get local governments complaining and saying it is too much, right? We had, a high number of refugees coming into the country since 2015, and then we have big news in German newspapers saying the mayor of this city is very small, they host 2,000 refugees, and they're saying we are at the end of our capacities. But often it's about money, but it's about capacities, but it's also about the redistribution of money. Because if the cities are being left alone to deal with a high influx of refugees, who's going to pay for this? So of course they ask the national government to support them more, or to say they're not willing to take more refugees. Of course we have to differentiate between refugees and migrants, because if migrants come from work, of course, most cities are very happy to have a high number of migrants and they support it in a certain way. But it's pointed out very much, there's a tension between the two levels, and it gets even more complicated because the process is called stepwise migration, right? That means, probably in the Philippines the case, you don't necessarily go from the province to Saudi Arabia, you might come first to the capital, or to Manila, or your province capital, stay there with friends and relatives, and then you leave the country, right? So then we have even more complex scenarios.
Sure. I think the tension between the local and the national is also happening here in the Philippines because, as we all know, the labor migration program of the country has been led really centrally, It's been centralized since 1974. But with the amendments to the migrant workers law, the local government units have also taken on some responsibilities. It was a slow process, but initially they were, I think they were, they participated initially with migration and development programs, such as training return migrants for entrepreneurship or on financial literacy programs, in general on reintegration. But lately, I think 2 years ago, when South Korean local government units were partnering with local government units in the Philippines to recruit what do you call this, potential labor migrants in their agricultural sector. Because after the pandemic,
The seasonal workers.
they call it the seasonal workers program, because after the pandemic, I think many left. And of course, the South Korean economy wanted to develop. But then, the tension was that local government units were never legally part of the recruitment process. And such that some mayors were actually, what they call this, accused of illegal recruitment. But then, what the mayors were arguing is that, no, we have an agreement, a sisterhood agreement. Yeah, so I don't know if it has been resolved because some seasonal workers were actually exploited or abused. So yeah, there was that news. I don't know how it has been resolved, but I think the Department of Migrant Workers for a time had to ban the deployment of seasonal workers in the agricultural sector in Korea. But right now, I think it has been what do you call this, revitalized, but with a better legal framework.
If I may add, the twinning agreement between sister cities and their counterpart abroad have been going on for quite some time.
Yeah, yes.
But these are mainly used to advance more of a political and social relations between the two.
Or cultural, no?
Cultural, more of cultural. And lately, as Professor Gina said, there's a new phenomenon that is being used by the local authorities as a way to ease the unemployment in their locality. So they have seen the potential of using their existing twinning agreements in order to facilitate job generation. Because for them, it makes for good optics. I mean, my constituents get a job.
Yes, exactly.
But then again, the problem was, of course, they're exercising their autonomy. We know that. But then again, because of certain issues that crop up when the worker gets sick, or the contract gets rescinded, or they're not being paid enough, because that's the time when it was put on radar by the national government, when it was noticed by the national government, and the DMW said that no, they have to pass through us for the mandatory credit card orientation seminar, as well as the contracts. The contract should be validated by the DMW. So I think there was a compromise between that. And the LGUs have agreed to be comply with the DMW requirement, but they were not prohibited from continuing the relationship, the economic relationship. They just put on several guardrails in order to protect the seasonal workers, because these are not technically members of the Overseas Workers Welfare Board. They're not registered with DMW. So if something happens to them,
exactly.
the problem of insurance, the repatriation comes up.
Okay, and seasonal work means like for half a year or time
For
frame?
less than
4 months.
That's a planting season. And we have that with Israel. Several local government units have that kind of agreement. Even SUCs like Tarlac State University has a training agreement with their counterparts in Israel, where they send their students to expose them on several technologies and agriculture. But at the same time, they're getting paid for the work. So there are variations.
It's a fascinating example I was not aware of, because before I came here, of course, twin cities are very common in Germany and elsewhere, but it also shows the almost power struggle or debate between the different levels of government, right? The national government wants to set a standard, and sometimes the local level goes up against it, right? In both ways.
But I mean, he mentioned, Rod mentioned about SUCs, state universities and colleges having sisterhood twinning arrangements with the counterparts in other countries. Do you think that's also another way that this kind of trend towards localizing, migration governance can get
But a small scale level, I would say, right? I mean, these are not very large numbers. Because coming from the city of Freiburg, we have university partnerships with medicine in the States, we have one with France and other cities. We get a lot of university migration. Sometimes people stay, sometimes people get married, so the ties are getting closer between the cities. But for formal labor migration arrangement, it has to go through the national government. But of course, what always has been shown is that these networks can facilitate migration. Because the one place, some people call it localization or trans-local in this case connections. If you know about this city, and I have my friends there, we have had the cumulative effect that people actually don't go from Mexico to the United States, and they don't even go from Oaxaca to Los Angeles. They go from a certain part of a city to another certain part, right? So you have a certain quarter where migrants from a certain province live. So that's how tiny these connections are.
I guess the same thing can be said also about remittances. I mean, there's been talk recently about Filipinos not remitting back to the Philippines for some reason, for one reason or another. But ultimately, these remittances don't go to the country at large. They go to a specific household, household within a particular town, a particular place in a country.
The famous example here is, help me with the name, the Italian Little Italy.
Anilao.
Mabini, right? Where many remittances are coming from Italy, right? I've never been there, but I heard about that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a diving. So it's interesting.
But that aspect of it.
May I also ask Stefan, since you've observed this mayoral forum, I mean, are the mayors from sending countries also attending, or are they always the destination countries who are interested?
No, they're attending. Also, like Quezon City was representative of these, and other sending countries are attending and demonstrating their good practices, right? So it's an exchange forum about what is working here in a certain way. But one of the challenges is maybe what has been called like an urban migration governance paradox. If I quote my colleague Stefan Rother, who has wrote a fantastic book actually, by the way, on city diplomacy or power diplomacy. Because on the one hand, we have a growing trend of urbanization, decentralization, and other things. And the impact actually happens on a local level. But on the other hand, the cities have very limited to no options to bring this expertise back to the national level. So it depends very much on the state formation. Like in Germany, we have kind of a council of the cities that is being heard in public debate and has some influence, because the party systems, of course, have their representatives on the national level as well. But in more centralized states, the cities might find it much harder to be heard about their advocacy.
Because in the Philippine context, much of the talk about migration is centralized at the national level. And it's only been a few years since we started with several projects involving local actors, local authorities. I think it was early 2010 when we worked with Celebrating Migration Center on the project Migrant Associations and Philippine Institutions for Development. It's part of the project was for us to scan local authorities and regional government agencies migration-related policies or ordinances. And unfortunately, we have found very little evidence, because majority of answers that we get from them is that migration is something that is within the purview of national authorities.
Okay, so
but there was a shift afterwards when we worked with the United Nations Development Program on the Joint Migration for Development Initiative. It aims to capacitate local government authorities to include the migration, to mainstream migration in their local processes. And among the challenges that was said was, look, a lot of government services are being devolved to us by the national authority, and then you're going to ask us again to include migration in their sphere of health, education, welfare, and so on and so forth. But there were a lot of local authorities who were receptive to the idea, because they realized that, hey, it's a good point. All migration is local. They are still our constituents. They work there, but they come back here. And most of the time, their only concept was, the only target was, how many jobs can you facilitate? I mean, how many of your constituents can you get out
Right.
provide service? That's the only metric before that was being used. And because it was also downloaded by the Department of Labor and Employment, they provided technical support for the local authorities to establish the PESO, the Public Employment Service Office. So by its very nature, it's really focused on one thing, to send people out, to conduct job fairs, to ensure that these are not illegal recruiters. But in our work, there were some responsive local governments. Among them is the provincial government of Pangasinan. I mean, the governor at that time saw that, hey, it's beyond labor migration. So the first thing that he did was to retool his provincial peso, and then asked the Sanggunian, the local council, to pass an ordinance establishing a Migration and Development Council. It's called the PMTC. So that was something groundbreaking at that time, I think 2013, and they did that, and then they established funds. And then there were initiatives before to re-engage with the various overseas Filipino groups. They even called it OF/W associations. And every December, we get that invite, every December they host awards. They have a one-day migrant fair to engage the families left behind. And they give out awards. They call it BOLUN, short for voluntarism award. And they made some work in the census because they want to know how many migrants that they have. And it's still ongoing. They have dedicated personnel whose work is to look after the reintegration part for their kababayans who are in distress. So while we have medical repatriation, the last mile is the one missing out. After they reach the airport, who takes care of them? So the provincial government steps up, provide reintegration services, and at the same time, the most important thing was there's a paradigm shift among the thinking. It's not about job facilitation anymore. It's a 360-degree, looking at their constituents, not only facilitating that daily, but looking afterwards. I mean, when they come back. And which brings me to another interesting case of the provincial government of Ilocos Norte, another province in north that has a long historical migration history with the Saharas or going to Hawaii. They established a fund that's specifically reserved for families of migrants and former migrants living in Ilocos Norte. The fund is deposited under the cooperative. Cooperative lends it at competitive rates. The provincial government extends technical assistance through the various forms. They help you get your loan, and then the rates are very competitive, and it's guaranteed by the provincial government. And on top of that, while facilitating your financial needs, they also come up with an ordinance that provides a set of additional incentives, like you get free access for several years while your business is operating. And then other fees like the mayor's fee, the work fee, are also waived for a number of years just to get your business off the ground. And aside from that, they also have, you can also use the facilities of the local government. Should you need a room, should you need a computer, you can access them. And another similar case with Naga City in the Bicol region. Another one of the pioneers in the migration and development talks. They, through our website that we co-developed with them, it's can be accessed at naga.balimbayan.gov.ph. They made some of their services for migrants online. I mean, not only the real property tax payment where they can pay online, but they listed all of the services that can be accessed by their migrants. So the thing is, what I'm trying to realize is that because of this paradigm shift among local authorities, I mean, the migration landscape at the local level is quite interesting, because the proof of the pudding is we want to show other local governments what other local governments are doing. We can provide lectures, but they will only listen to their fellow
Okay.
local executives. So we're showing them that this is what the local government is.
Is there a formal network of the local governments, or where they meet up and talk about this issue? Have they formed like a national network?
There are leagues. Yeah,
Yes, they have local association, regional association, but the national umbrella is through the League of Municipalities or League of Cities or League of Provinces. Or another one, the Union of Local Authorities.
Oh, yes.
Where they are linked already, and then migration is one of the topics.
Yes.
But I want to taking off from what you said, because I mean, local governments in the Philippines are not all the same.
Yes.
They can all be like Naga,
Yes.
or Davao, or Pangasinan, or Ilocos Norte. At the same time, local governments are affected by migration in different ways.
Yes.
We're not all Ilocos Norte, we're not all huge, sources of migrants or immigrants. There are some that will have, but in most cases, I think, given the fact that a lot of our municipalities, our towns are rather poor, so they don't have the ability to move to greater distances. I mean, they may have the ability to move to Manila, to Cebu, or to some other urban, highly urbanized place within the Philippines. That's internal migration. But to have the ability to move to a different country, to cross a continent, takes a huge amount of resources. And not all local governments, not all households within these local governments will have that ability. So I wonder now, how do we proceed from here? Do we encourage local governments also to develop the mindset when they don't have, it's not a problem for them yet, right? Do we make them come up with migration and development local council? But it's not a big concern for them at this point.
Yeah.
So we may have to be kind of selective in terms of applying this. It's a good idea, definitely.
And I think it has to be bottom up and top down at the same time, right? I mean, if you have a program and they're not very interested, they only participate because they get some funding and there's a framework, it's not very sustainable, right? But if there's a genuine interest or need, policy-wise, then it might be more sustainable to build a network from your map.
Yeah. What I know from Quezon City is that they already, I think we were also involved. Remember, in Antipolo, we trained some of them when they were developing their migration and development unit. So they've had it for quite some time, I think less than 10 years. And then the pandemic happened. And when the pandemic happened, naturally the national government, because they had to be quarantined, those who were returning, they had to look for which local government unit do you belong and whether they have facilities for quarantine. And the Quezon City government thankfully had already had a migration and development unit that takes care of returnees and also takes care of their quarantine needs and all the services that they needed. So that's the, I think when I also got to talk to some officials of the Quezon City government, that's what they said, that it's something that sort of even strengthen their program, or there was now a need for the program to, for their unit to even expand, maybe become a department, because they saw that there's really a need. And they've been regarded by ILO and by IOM, I think, as a model. And they want, of course, because of the ways in which, sometimes continuity is not certain, especially that our local government officials are only there for 3 years. I don't know in Germany. Longer. And so it's not, so to guarantee that that this is going to continue no matter who the mayor is, I think now they're thinking of the idea that their unit be expanded. But it also came from the Public Employment Service Office, which was actually expanded to a migration and development unit. Now they want it to serve as a department, along with social service, social welfare departments within the local government unit of Quezon City. So I hope it develops into such, because Quezon City is the largest city, also in terms of tax revenues. So they're quite,
And they hosted the second mayoral forum in 2016. They participate, but during that time they still have a very low appreciation for migration development.
Took some time,
In Germany, we've had 6 to 7 years, the mayor, so the election.
it's quite long.
I think it's good actually in a way, because then you think a bit more long term.
Yes.
Of course, if you don't like the mayor,
Same here.
that's always the case. But of course, one problem with policies is that they're only going from election to election, right?
Yes.
It's like short wins and no long-term policies. But it brings me to a point that politics is always personalized, but maybe that is even more true for local politics. Because the mayor, male or female, is often a very dominant person, and they may take an interest in this topic, then somebody else gets elected and might have a different interest, and then the sustainable again is not so much seen. Or somebody from a different party comes. I think it's less a case of sending countries, but with receiving countries of migrants and refugees, there might be somebody very welcoming. Then a right-wing politician gets elected and he says, we don't want any migrants or refugees there. And then the membership ends. So you need also to have dialogue on the high-level bureaucratic levels. But maybe I jumped a few steps ahead in the beginning to the global level. First, of course, we have to see cooperation on a national level, right? And you rightfully pointed out, not every Philippine local government is the same, and the differences become even bigger if you compare a German municipality with a Filipino municipality. Right? So why should we form an alliance? But if you look at the literature, Macqua, I hope I pronounced it correctly, has found more than 60 migration-related city networks globally. I cannot list all of them, and the time would be over here already. The cities of migration, the cities of refuge, the mayor's mechanism. There's many overlapping networks of cities. But there is a certain bias. I attended some of these forums, of course. It's often very strong personalities, very engaged policies. And may I also say, maybe people, in some cases, think the city is not big enough for me in a certain way. Or it's a personality trait, right? If you like to go to the United Nations and present your city as a model, that is great. But there's other mayors that say, I'm so busy at the city level, that is my focus, I cannot do this as somebody, right? So, of course, you have more the pro-migration, globally outlooking cities. You have many big cities, you have Montreal in Canada, you have Lampedusa, which has many refugees in Italy. So you have a very diverse group, actually, that we have to keep in mind. If you look at global city networks, receiving, sending, different policy affiliations.
But it would be good in a way to map out the best practices, the better practices and experiences in these diverse local government, local authority settings. You spoke of how many years does the mayor have? 7 years?
Yeah, plus minus, depends in Germany on the state.
In a way, that can be a good thing for the voters because it makes the voters also think in strategic terms. It's not like here, you'll only be here for 3 years. You tend to just make a loose choice. But if it's for 7 years, then you think more carefully.
You have to deal with this person for
Exactly.
But I mean, I'm speaking from the German example now, of course, the big cities are very politicized. The small to medium cities, it's a bit less party politics, right? It's more somebody who's respected locally, I mean, that might be the case here too, and it's a bit more pragmatic, I would say, city parties, right? So not as influenced. But another point I wanted to make, good practices, best practices, very important. But then they also say the global politics are affecting our local politics. And I think that's the motivation by going there. We have the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration. So the mayors were not very much involved, but they tried to be very involved. And it lists in several of the objectives the importance of the local and regional level, right? So they make sure they are included. And that's why they're part of these processes, because they want global policies to be shaped in a way that it influences them. So they're very vocal. I go to many of these meetings online, elsewhere. There's always a representative of some mayor, council, or other organization saying, this is our position. There's even a book, it's a bit older, if mayors ruled the world. You heard this, like it's in America, it says, it's very self-confident, like we know how politics are, and it claims that the world would be a better place. You can debate this in a certain way, but they're very confident in how presenting a solution.
On that note, Professor Stefan, I would like to ask, in Germany right now, I'm quite curious, what are some of the innovations being adopted by the local authorities there in terms of talk on migration?
I mean, the German debate is very one-sided in a way that it seems to focus mostly on refugees and forgets a bit about labor migration, which is more my focus, right? But this topic has been, it is a challenge, I'm not downplaying it, but it has been so dominant in the news by certain right-wing parties. So even my students in the first semester, we have to debate migrants and refugees. What's the difference? Are they the same, right? And if you ask some Germans on the street, for them all migrants are refugees, right? It's a very different perspective than here, right? But then bringing labor and refugees together is something very important, giving refugees the opportunity to work actually, which they were not allowed. In Germany for a long time, if you're not a recognized refugee, you were not allowed to work. So that caused many problems. I mean, if you have people complaining, they are coming here and they're not working, then they're not allowed to do it, right? And that had some resentments going on. But we have some cities with a very high percentage of people with a non-German background, Frankfurt, Stuttgart and others, and they have many good policies. They have like a local council of migrants, for example. There's many studies on this. Every city has a bit of a different principle, unfortunately, because not every migrant can vote in Germany. You have to have citizenship, but on a local level, you're sometimes allowed to vote without citizenship. And that is, on paper at least, a potential to be more inclusive. Because if you don't vote, then you're not involved in politics, then you don't feel very inclined. But sometimes they have like their own council, because they cannot vote. They have like a Migrantinnenbeirat, they have a council of migrants. It can be a bit tokenistic in a certain way, right? Because they cannot make the final decisions, they are being heard. Again, it's very personalized.
But migrants can also access the same type of services being offered by the local authorities to their constituents.
Depending on status, I would say. If it's a legal, regular working status, many are open for them. As refugees, there are some limitations.
Certain state in Spain even go to the point of issuing identity cards for their local migrants. I'm asking this because I think a month ago we hosted several officials from your German embassy here. I mean, it started with the conversation started with data. We're asking how many Filipinos are there in Germany right now, and then they replied, "Can we visit you?" So we took that as a cue. They want to discuss other things. So I'll just make short because some things are confidential. But a majority, the German deputy chief of mission at that time was really looking at ways on how, because currently the pair program with Germany was suspended by the Philippine government because we stopped sending there because of certain issues. So right now they're lobbying for its reinstatement. But one of the issues there is that we're looking at how can local authorities, play a part in promoting the welfare of our affairs. Because before its suspension, Germany was the leading European country that posed Filipino affairs there for third stage.
I was not even aware of that.
And one of the issues was with cultural affair was the prohibitive cost of learning the language, because one of the stipulations that you have to learn the local language, and they're only given a stipend of around 400 or less in exchange for minimum work. So because of certain issues, it's suspended. So we're looking at ways wherein probably the local authorities can step in with the other type of migrants, because they're not labor migrants, cultural exchange. But some of them use that pathway to go into labor
Right.
or to get into marriage migration and such. So I'm just wondering if it has already figured in your research.
I think I would say the Filipino community in Germany has not been very visible, but that has changed the past years because of the important role they are playing in care work. Right? So even conservative parties have recognized we are very Asian society. Right? When I started out doing research on the Philippines, it was 80 million in 2005, and now it's
What? The population?
100, right? So a quarter more, right? So in Germany, the birth rate is much lower. There's many predictions that at least we need 100,000 migrants per year only to uphold our social system, right? Because even we have less and less younger people, but people get older, which is a good trend, but we have a fairly good pension scheme and health scheme, so even less younger people are paying for the support of the older, right? So we need new workforces, and if people get older, they need more care. So that's, now I see many articles all of a sudden in German newspapers about Filipino care migrants coming over. And then it's a bit about, it's a contested term, but I stand by it, the welcome culture in Germany, right? I mean, you have to be attractive. Many Germans have not realized that, but I mean, it's not like a gift that you can come to Germany, you also bring something with you, right? And you should make Germany an attractive place, right? I mean, there are cases of racism, the language is very hard, it's a very different social structure, so many, not even only mayors, but many directors of care institutions for the elderly are becoming proactive. They're having ties to the Philippines and other places. They say, when you're here, I support you. When you get homesick, here's my phone number, you can call me 24/7. Because they're in such short need of labor migrants or care workers that they say, okay, we have to give something back when they come here, right? And I think that's an integration process that has been going fairly well, also on a local level.
Which highlights the role played, the important role played by local authorities, because they can act as an additional support system, additional buffer, as a leverage to that of the national government, because they see things on the ground, so they tend to be more receptive to the migrants' needs aside from their local population.
But I wonder, because, I mean, when you talk about the Mayor's Forum and all that, all these local initiatives, managing local migration, to what extent do local governments have a certain credibility when it comes to international enterprises? Is it a question of convincing national officials? Maybe you could be in a better position to answer this question, because you belong to a national government agency. Based on your experience with other national government agencies, are they easily convinced by arguments that are coming from local governments, from local government officials? Let's say, this is our experience in our town, etc., etc. You better listen to us because these are really on-the-ground experiences. Do national government officials listen?
I have a quote for this, but you go first.
Yeah. I think with the structures in place, because we have seen among migration government agencies in the Philippines, there's this subcommittee on international migration and development hosted by our National Economic and Development Authority. That's the national planning agency of the government. But right now it's being transitioned to be given to the Department of Migrant Workers. And among its members include the local Union of Local Authorities in the Philippines. So, but there's a recognition among migrant agencies right now that local authorities have a seat at the table. When they say something, for us, we listen because they're coming from experience. And we know that they are our good partners in the ground for us to communicate some of our programs. And every year, much to our pleasure, local governments have been hosting migrant fairs in the regions for free. I mean, they shoulder everything. We just provide the substantive part of the program, but most of the time they do the organizing. For us at the national, there's already this paradigm shift, if I may, and at the same time an appreciation that when local governments call you or send you an email, you better you better respond immediately, because we have realized that they're really partners. They're not competitions, or they're from the province, we're from the Manila, because we're also avoiding that Manila-centric thing, the Republic of Manila, or so much concentrated on Manila, because we realize that it works both ways right now. So that's the good thing, because we are migration agencies are really seeing them as partners, as our partners in the ground.
A nice quote from the mayor of Montreal in Canada on this, looking back, that's saying, I could not be prouder of what we have accomplished. We went from being an outsider to having a seat at the table, as the world is realizing that local solutions are national successes. Right? So that's a good point, right? Because they're part of the nation, of course. They're not a separate entity in a way, but it's good for everybody in the country.
In the context of the Philippines, mayors are also taking on migration issues primarily because they're constituents.
Well, exactly, the families.
Especially the families who remain. No, the migrants may be here and there, but then the families who remain are really the number one constituents. That's why in Quezon City, for instance, I think one of the tasks of, I don't know if this is true for all local government units, one of the tasks of their migration and development unit is to organize the overseas Filipino family circles. So these family circles have leaders. No? So these leaders can practically be your political leaders too. No?
Organizers.
And voters, of course.
Yeah. So if that is if you do well. No? So there's also that incentive.
And then they're the conduits, so they also serve as the bridge between the groups and the mayor, at the same time conduits of assistance, especially during December.
Yes.
That's why it's a win-win proposition.
I think that's the ideal term, but I have the impression sometimes we have city governments who don't agree with their national government. And then for them it's a way to bypass in a certain way the national government and then confront them on a global stage or get something in place against it. And of course, bringing the United States as an example, I think many cities in the United States don't quite agree with the current government in many issues. So, I mean, one example that is often cited is not migration, but when the US left the Paris Agreement for the first time, now they've left again.
They keep on leaving.
Yeah, I hope they come back. But some cities said, we're going to sign it on a city level, right?
Yes.
So that's like global policy, global democracy. They said, we're going to adhere by the Paris standards, even if our national government is doing something else at the moment.
That's a good thing about them having autonomy, the devolution concept, because if something happens with the national government,
I mean, the US is a special case, of course, now they're being punished, right? I mean, you heard the stories, the sanctuary cities, now the national government says, we're sending busloads of refugees to your city, because if you want to have them, take them, right? And there's a lot of pressure on them, so. And then they have to actually step down, right? Because the national government is often more powerful when it comes, like authority or police and other things, it gets really confrontational, they're not in the same position to negotiate. But then it's even more helpful for them to see, okay, our government doesn't like us, but we have allies in Europe, in the Philippines, and other places in the world, and that's what we have our network for.
Yeah. And one other case for Quezon City is that when a lot of Filipino women married to those who fled from the Gaza conflict came to the Philippines, one of the first to accept Palestinian migrants was Quezon City. And they even devised a program for them in which they sell the food that they prepare, and they were advertised, no? On Facebook and elsewhere. So they have an income, steady income while they're here.
So both partners, the Palestinian spouse also was able to come here? No?
Yeah, yes,
Yes.
because their children will practically be stateless, no? Stateless ba?
But they're technically Filipino.
They're technically
The children. The children, because they're married to a Filipina, say they have certain privileges here to stay for a long time.
Yeah.
Very practical question, where did they meet? Because are there many Filipinos in Gaza? Hard to imagine.
You'll be surprised.
But they're everywhere, right?
You'll be surprised.
They met there, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Before the war erupted, we're not even sure that there were Filipinos in Gaza.
But then-
much less married to Gazans, because that country is not a typical. It's not in our records as a major destination countries for Filipinos married, but because of certain shifts in their migration pathways, probably because of love.
Yeah.
And aside from Quezon City, the province of Cavite is also hosting a certain group of Gazans, Filipino Gazans.
But every time a crisis breaks out somewhere, you realize how many Filipinos are in the country, right?
Only when the crisis.
Yeah, hopefully, apart from that, but then...
Yeah, which brings us also to data. Because all the more, especially if you're going to, shift some assistance to migrants at the government, at the local government level, on the one hand, it's easier to collect data because it's the basic unit, you know. But then, on the other hand, I don't know if all local government units would have the capacity to collect data. Because if you ask local government units if they have data, they would not say that they have. No?
Yes,
So yeah, they rely on the national. But I hope right now, because of the e-travel, they would have a more systematic way of collecting data. But processing is, as we discussed yesterday, is another matter.
So perhaps we're looking at even the local government can take it as their own initiative for them to collect local data. But the question is, maybe, how will you entice your constituent migrants to register with you? Unless you provide with some
Some form of an incentive.
yes.
But I mean, even the national level gets its data from the local level at the end, right?
Actually, no.
I mean, you must collect the data somewhere.
It has to come from somewhere.
Yeah, but bypassing the local government, how they...
I don't think it's
National government agencies, they collect their own. Right?
Like our agency, we collect district data directly from our registrants.
Okay.
And we do not share this with the local governments.
But speaking of constituents, because I wonder where is this all headed to, or what challenges do you think local governments are going to face? Because not all of their constituents might be on the same page when it comes to positioning the local government to assist migrants, to have this kind of migration-oriented perspective to things. You know? What if the local constituents would say, oh, why focus on them? Why privilege this particular sector? We have other problems to deal with.
Right.
You know, how do you think how should local government officials, deal with this kind of a scenario?
I mean, they always have to make it highlight the benefit for everyone. For instance, I mean, if a country of destination, you say we need social harmony is a big word, right? But we need good social relations here. It's good for the economy if everybody has a job and other aspects we can learn from other cities. Maybe you can be proud of us and that we are a model city, so we show in other cities in the world how it's being done. That has to be highlighted. But there will always be a part of the voters being not satisfied and saying, he or she likes to go to New York, they should stay here and care about local problems, right? The street is not being built for 10 years. What's about that, right? So you have to prioritize. And I always wonder, with a question to you, if you go below the level, go to the barangay level, what would that role be in a certain way? Because they're even more closer to the people, right? Do you have experiences there or?
Well, the barangay level, well, it's funny because if you're a migrant coming from and you go
You need
down to
clearance,
your
right?
village, right now, No. I think you're more treated like a cash cow or a hero. There are many sides to it. I mean, if people perceive you as successful, then people will ask you for anything under the sun. Or ask you to sponsor a friend's baptism, or during fiestas, you're asked to sponsor the singers or the band or anything. That's one of the things that we uncovered during our technical sessions, capacity building with the local governments. We need to shift the thinking among the villagers, people at the local level, of how they perceive overseas Filipinos. They're not walking ATMs.
Yeah.
They should be seen as partners for development. And we tell overseas Filipinos who are going back that it's not your responsibility to give everything out of your pocket, because these things that you earned came from your hard years of working outside. So
And it's also not just about the money.
yes.
We have professionals also who
Definitely.
gain skills. They can also impart those skills.
Yes.
I tried asking I live in Quezon City, so our barangay officials, if they know people who have returned from migration. They said they know from that street and that, but they never went back to me because I wanted to interview this.
And they always assume
And
that
they don't collect the data.
and they always assume that that person is well off, has money, doesn't need additional services from us.
Yeah.
The sort of thing.
But if they're not successful, they're seen as a failure, right? It's
Yes.
terminated or
There's
abused.
that stigma.
It's a stigma as well. Right? So that's why many go out again, maybe.
Or that's why some do not go back, do not return.
Or change residence.
Yes.
Okay,
A place where they're
No.
Or they go undocumented and they pretend to their families that they're still well on.
Or because they are relatively better off now, they can afford better schools. So they move to those places where
Some social
resources
mobility.
are, the infrastructure, is available.
Oh, I'm just curious. I just would like to ask with what's happening in the U.S. right now, and we know that the president of the U.S. has still a good 4 years in the first term.
It seems like 4 years already.
Seems like
It's 4 months, but it feels like 4 years.
But with his anti-migrant rhetoric, it's pulling out the United States from membership in international organizations, he even got funding to several UN agencies like the IOM, and their contributions to ILO. I mean, for countries, smaller countries, we always look up to the US as a barometer for things. And before that, they espouse migration. Right now, there's so much anti-migration rhetoric, and I think what are the implications of the U.S. government's action right now against immigration and anti-migrant rhetoric that can affect the international discussions on migration, on local governance, especially first world countries like Europe or in Asia, that will probably impinge or affect countries of destination such as the Philippines. What's your take on this?
So I mean, the term globalist in some corners has become a very negative term. I'm one of these terrible globalists because I believe in global governance and I believe in cooperation. And I think there is a value there, right? So I think the US, and that's more like a statement than a criticism, it has always had very hypocritical policies in a certain way. Upholding, like preaching standards, not always upholding them. But I tell my students, it's still good that they were doing this because we saw in the 4 years again now, if nobody upholds the standards, then everybody all of a sudden gets more daring to break the standards, right? So I mean, when people said it doesn't make a difference who we elect for the US president, I would say that is not true because this authority on a global level has completely vanished. I mean, if you go beyond migration, who would stop, to talk about geopolitics now, if China would invade Taiwan tomorrow, they would say, come on, but the US wants to take Greenland, they want to take Canada, they want to take what, right? So it lost all authority in this regard for national sovereignty. So that's like the big politics picture. But in many other regards, including all these conventions, and it's a back and forth. So the first 4 years, they were against the Global Compact for Migration, they were against all agreements. Under the Biden administration, you can see the US is back, right? And everybody was relieved because they're so involved in all levels because they built the global system we are living in was to a large part built and influenced by the US. So they were hegemonic, but they have to be sort of a benign hegemon in a certain way, right? You have to support other countries, you have to build the structures so they respect your authority. So now the whole system, which I was very critical of in many regards, is being shaken because this authority is missing, right? And now we have many right-wing governments in Europe who don't feel obliged anymore to adhere to these standards. I mean, Hungary always has been the paria in a certain regard, but if you look at the elections in the past years, almost the majority of the governments in Europe now has right-leaning and it's getting more extreme in a certain way. So as much as I'm involved in global standards like the Global Compact for Migration, it feels very much removed from the debate we have in the countries, where like borders are being closed, anti-migrant sentiments are being shown, people are deported in the US without rule of law. So that sounds very pessimistic, but I'm very pessimistic because I think the first 4 years stuff was partially destroyed, but can be built up again. But looking at the damage we have now in 4 months already, how will we survive 4 years in the international system?
Are you saying it's going to get worse before it gets better?
I hope it gets better. I'm a very pessimistic moment, but the last time, maybe he was so unprepared, kind of like Biden was putting the pieces back together, going to the status quo, which we can be very critical of in many regards, but still at least better than what was before. But this time there was clearly a plan, not a very good plan economically wise, I would say, to really destroy the system from within. So that's
the very system that the US
exactly.
itself.
The global system, but also in a way the political system. There's very good research being now how democracies die, right? And democracies die from the inside now. It's not necessarily a military coup d'etat or something. It's by fighting against the independence of law, shutting down critical media, shutting down society. So there's a playbook, right? Which many other countries know. And I think the US system it's not quite strong enough because it wasn't made for this in a way. It was always for making a deal, right? We had bipartisan agreements, but if you're really not accepting any rules and the rule of law, so where are we going there? And unfortunately, many dictators and authoritarian leaders feel encouraged by this now. So I hope it's not a domino effect or something, but that's why I'm very frustrated in this regard. The blame it on the migrants narrative is very, very dominant.
But do you think this kind of attitude will be adopted also by local government officials?
Maybe unlikely, I would say, in a certain way. Right? I don't know about the Philippines. On the other hand, we've been very decentralized. I mean, with local leaders and others. That I don't think, but maybe the local level will have to stand up even more strongly. Maybe that's the point we see here against the government. But some of the sanctuary cities in America already caved in, or they're not using this term anymore. And we really see some flip-flopping to use the term here. I forgot what city it was. Was it, I don't want to name a city now, it's not true. But it was one American city where the mayor was very pro-migrant, very much in the networks, and now he shifted 180 degrees and is repeating all his racist and xenophobic remarks. So there's a lot of opportunism going
But
on.
in that regard, the US is quite different because local governments depend a great deal on federal resources.
And that's something I learned coming from a German perspective again now. And I would say there's more checks and balances in a way. You cannot just fire 10,000 people, state servants, from one day to another. It's just not possible, right? There's labor laws, there's other things going against it, right? So but in the States, like defunding of universities, big problem, right, for many and other things.
So with the US out of the equation, what's the prospect for the European Union to step in and stabilize the global ship on migration. There's a vacuum being left by the US right now, and
Unfortunately,
what's your prospect for EU? Will they step in and say, will they charge?
Yeah.
they might step in, but not in a way I would think is the best way, in a certain way. Because the way would be more like, we close our borders, we want less refugees, we want clearly skilled migrants, which is okay, but I think the majority goes more to avoid, the one thinking is that you can beat a right-wing party by imitating their policies. Right? Because like, let me repeat, like, the more moderate conservative parties, and there's many case studies in Europe, they see there's a danger from the far right, and then they say, we'll also be hardline on migration.
Yeah.
But in every case, the right wing is always harder. If they say we close our borders, the other ones may say we have military there. So they can always stop this, right? So that's the wrong move. But I think the Fortress Europe, as the term has been coined, might be enforced in the coming years. So having more a right-based approach is not the main issue, right? The main issue now is defense. Defense spending is going up, which I can understand. Germany just took an enormous credit volume, as you may have heard in the news, for more defense spending. So that is seen as more important as maybe human rights of migrants and refugees.
And maybe it's a final note. I think, given what you said earlier about the resistance in a way that's coming from local governments, their unwillingness to yield to the national government's attitude towards immigration and migration. I think the best bulwark that we have against this kind of right-wing shift are the local governments.
In combination with civil society,
Yes.
glorify, of course. There's also uncivil society and other actors in this regard, but yeah, I think some grassroots movements with local governance would be important actors.
So do you think the different networks involving local governments will have some promise, especially given the fact that you have a global government structure that is in a way dominated by states?
Right.
Is there a possibility that local governments will occupy that vacuum if states are unwilling?
I think we shouldn't have put too much pressure on them or have too high expectations, but I'm still a bit optimistic in a way. If national governments for the next years don't support good or innovative policies, it might still go on the ground level. So local governments might still have best practices and say, okay, the national government might be xenophobic, but we're still a welcoming city, we see the benefit for our city, we still have these programs, and then, stuff may go on the ground, and hopefully in 4 years' time the world will look different, but we see about it. It's one building block, but of course they cannot bear the whole responsibility.
Okay, I guess.
A bit more, not the most negative ending, so what you point out.
Not completely negative.
No, because we have to face realities.
Potential.
So that's your prospect for the next few years.
As I said, in a way I'm not completely surprised what happened the past months, but when you see it in action, you're still surprised, right? I mean, everything was announced in a certain way they were going to do, but then you saw just big talk, right?
They didn't know that it's going to be so fast.
So fast. In a way, effective, I don't know if it's the right term, right? But a bit more well prepared, right? Yeah. And it's overwhelming, and that's the strategy. There's doing so many illegal, irregular, stupid, name it what you want, things at the same time, it's hard to keep track. And you get used to it in a certain way. I mean, stuff that happened like yesterday with the Signal group, we followed all this, right? In normal times, it would have been 5 people would be fired, everybody would step down responsibility, but now the standards have disappeared and they're just lying and saying it's not true and it was fabricated, so that's a frustrating part. Don't even know. A bit more boring politics would be nice.
Definitely, so it's something to watch out for. But we do hope that European countries can continue the provision of technical assistance, especially to countries of origin, because we have seen how effective UN agencies are good at extending international migration programs, which the countries recipient of numerous technical assistance we know how that bore fruit a lot. I mean, we're still experiencing the effects, good effects of those technical cooperation agreements, which we hope the European countries can continue funding those things that the United States cut off. And
it would be a smart move if you talk about soft power and concepts like this, but at the moment there are the deliberations on a new German government, right? Two parties being formed, and it's on the table. We have our own Ministry for Development Cooperation. If that would still exist, they consider they consider making part of the foreign ministry. And then they say like, okay, all our cooperation should be more seen from political gains, from economic perspectives. So that's not necessarily good news from this regards, right?
We're also looking at Canada. I mean, after US, Canada, we have high hopes for Canada to step in and be a global player, especially with their long and rich history in fostering multiculturalism in communities.
Many people in Europe say they should join the European Union, and it's not made as a joke. You're close to each other, okay, you're not in Europe exactly, but then we have the same mindset. Let's see, the election is upcoming, it's going to be interesting, but they're getting very patriotic now in Canada, right? I think Trump has influenced the election in Canada, but not in a way that he wants, because the Liberal Party is now certainly losing.
The Trump disease is spreading fast.
Exactly.
Faster than COVID.
But I think they have some antidote maybe they developed in Canada.
Yes.
That's all.